I live in a quiet, three-bedroom suburban house that I bought with my own hard-earned money. As a marketing manager, my life is a careful balance of deadlines, creativity, and being a single mom to my wonderful 5-year-old son, Ben. For a long time, this house was our sanctuary, a place of peace and happy chaos. That all changed when my parents, Richard and Linda, moved in, turning my home into a battlefield of resentment and entitlement. The breaking point came when their whispers turned into a full-blown accusation, one that I could never forget: "You and your kid are just freeloaders." Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. It all started 6 months ago with a frantic phone call from my mother, Linda. My father, Richard, had been laid off from his salesman job a year shy of his planned retirement. His pride, and their savings, had taken a massive hit. They had sold their home to downsize, but a series of bad investments, something my father was always chasing, had wiped out most of their nest egg. They were staying with my aunt, but that arrangement was quickly souring. "We just need a place for a few months, Noya," my mom had pleaded, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Just until we can get back on our feet. Your father is looking for part-time work. It won't be long, I promise." How could I say no? They were my parents. I remembered all the sacrifices they had made for me growing up. My own childhood home was filled with love, warmth, and the smell of my mom's baking. The thought of them being homeless, or feeling like a burden to my aunt, was unbearable. My house had 2 extra bedrooms since my ex-husband and I had separated 3 years prior. It seemed like the perfect solution. "Of course, Mom," I said without hesitation. "You can stay with me and Ben for as long as you need." The first few weeks were almost idyllic. My mom took over the kitchen, filling the house with the comforting aromas I remembered from my youth. My dad, a skilled handyman, fixed the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom and finally repaired the wobbly leg on our dining table. They doted on Ben, picking him up from school and showering him with the kind of undivided attention I couldn't always manage while juggling a demanding job. I started to think this could work, that having a full house again was a blessing in disguise. I made it clear from the start that they didn't need to contribute to the mortgage or major bills. That was my responsibility. However, we agreed they would pitch in for groceries and their personal expenses. It seemed fair. I wasn't asking for rent, I was just trying to manage the increased household costs without dipping into my own savings, which were earmarked for Ben's future and my own eventual retirement. The initial harmony began to fray around the edges after the first month. My father's job search was half-hearted at best. He'd spend most of the day on the couch, watching old westerns and complaining about the modern job market. "They don't value experience anymore," he'd grumble. "They just want some kid who knows how to use all these fancy computer programs." My suggestions of free online courses or local workshops were brushed aside with a wave of his hand. My mother, in turn, started making comments that felt less like helpful suggestions and more like passive-aggressive critiques. The way I organized the pantry was inefficient. The brand of laundry detergent I used wasn't as good as her preferred one. She started reorganizing things, my kitchen, the linen closet, even the layout of the living room furniture, without asking. It was my house, but it was starting to feel like I was just a tenant. The grocery situation also became a point of silent tension. Their contribution was sporadic. They'd buy a carton of milk or a loaf of bread, while I was left to cover the bulk of the shopping, which had nearly doubled with 2 extra adults in the house. When I gently brought it up, my mother looked wounded. "We get what we can, dear. Our budget is very tight." I felt a pang of guilt and dropped the subject, resolving to just cover the difference myself. It was for my parents, after all. The breaking point didn't come with a bang, but with a slow, simmering boil that finally erupted on a Tuesday evening. I had come home late from a particularly stressful day at work. We were launching a major campaign, and I'd been putting in extra hours all week. I walked in, exhausted, to the sight of my father asleep on the couch, the TV blaring, and an empty pizza box on the coffee table. Ben was watching cartoons in his room. I found my mother in the kitchen, humming to herself as she polished the already gleaming granite countertops. "Oh, you're home, dear," she said, not looking up. "There's a slice of pizza left for you in the box." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice even. "Thanks, Mom." "Was the pizza for dinner?" "Yes." "Ben was hungry, and your father and I didn't feel like cooking." My eye twitched. I had left cash on the counter that morning for groceries to make the lasagna I had planned for dinner. What happened to the lasagna? She finally turned to face me, her expression one of mild annoyance. "Oh, I didn't have time to get to the store. We used the money for the pizza. It's easier." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't about the lasagna. It was about the complete disregard for my effort, my money, and my role in my own home. Easier for who, Mom? I worked a 10-hour day. I was looking forward to a home-cooked meal. You were here all day. Her face hardened. "Well, excuse me for not being your personal chef, Noya. I'm doing my best. It's not easy living on handouts, you know." My father, roused by our raised voices, shuffled into the kitchen. "What's all the yelling about?" he grumbled, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Noya's upset that we ordered a pizza," my mother said, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. I stared at them, bewildered. "I'm not upset about the pizza. I'm upset that you used the grocery money I left and didn't even bother to tell me. I'm upset that I come home from a long day to find the house a mess and no consideration for me at all." My father's face contorted into a familiar scowl, the one he used when he felt his authority was being challenged. "Consideration? We're the ones doing you a favor, watching your kids so you can go off to your fancy job all day. You have no idea how much we do around here." The injustice of his statement stole my breath. "A favor? You live here for free, Dad. I pay the mortgage, the utilities, the internet. I buy most of the food. All I asked was for a little help, a little respect." That's when he said it. He stepped closer, his voice low and venomous, and pointed a finger at my face. "Respect? You talk about respect when you treat your own parents like charity cases? We raised you, we clothed you, we fed you for 18 years. Now you want to begrudge us a slice of pizza?" My mother joined in, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "He's right. We're not the ones with the problem here. You're the one who is so ungrateful. You and your kid are just freeloaders, living off our hard work." The word freeloaders echoed in the sudden silence of the kitchen. It hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. They were standing in the middle of my kitchen, in the house I paid for, with the food I bought, and they were calling me a freeloader. The accusation was so absurd, so profoundly twisted, that I couldn't even form a response. I just stood there, staring at the two people I had welcomed into my home out of love and duty, and saw only strangers. Strangers with cruel eyes and a bottomless sense of entitlement. The days following the freeloader incident were thick with a suffocating tension. My parents and I moved around each other like ghosts, speaking only when absolutely necessary. They would say good morning and I would offer a clipped hello in return. Meals were silent, strained affairs. They had not apologized, and I had not confronted them further. I was too hurt, too stunned by the sheer audacity of their accusation. I retreated into myself, focusing on work and on shielding Ben from the toxic atmosphere that had infested our home. Their behavior, however, underwent a subtle but chilling shift. They began to act less like guests and more like proprietors. They would have friends over without asking me first. I'd come home to find strangers in my living room, my mother serving them tea in my best china. They would change the thermostat to their liking, complaining that I kept the house too cold, my protests about the soaring electricity bill falling on deaf ears. One afternoon, I was on a conference call in my home office when I overheard my mother talking to her sister, my Aunt Carol, on the phone in the hallway. Her voice was sweet and syrupy, dripping with false humility. "Oh, it's a lovely house," she was saying. "Noya has done so well for herself." Of course, she had a good start. Richard and I made sure she had everything she needed to succeed. We sacrificed a lot for her education. There was a pause. "Is it difficult living here?" "Well, it's an adjustment. We have to be very careful not to get in her way. She's very particular about her space. And with the little one, it can be quite chaotic. We help out as much as we can, of course. It's the least we can do, given the circumstances." I felt a hot flush of anger. The way she framed it, they were the long-suffering saints, patiently enduring the quirks of their difficult daughter. There was no mention of them living there rent-free, no hint of the financial support I was providing. It was a carefully crafted narrative designed to paint them as martyrs and me as the ungrateful, demanding child. The final straw came a week later. My best friend, Jessica, came over to pick me up for a much-needed dinner out. As we were walking out the door, my father stopped us. "Where are you two off to?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp and judgmental. "We're just going out for dinner, Dad," I replied. He looked from me to Jessica, a smirk playing on his lips. "Must be nice," he said, loud enough for Jessica to hear. "Spending money on fancy restaurants when some people are struggling to make ends meet." Jessica, who knew the whole story, looked furious. I felt my face burn with humiliation. I grabbed her arm and pulled her out the door before either of us could say something we'd regret. In the car, I finally broke down, the tears I had been holding back for weeks streaming down my face. "I can't do this anymore, Jess," I sobbed. "They're making me feel like a stranger in my own home. They've twisted everything to make me the villain." Jessica listened patiently, her expression a mixture of sympathy and outrage. "Noya, this isn't just about them being difficult guests," she said firmly. "This is emotional manipulation. They are gaslighting you. You need to do something. You need to find out what's really going on." Her words were a splash of cold water. She was right. This was more than just ingratitude. Their behavior felt calculated. The freeloader comment wasn't just a slip of the tongue in a moment of anger, it was a reflection of a deeper, more warped perspective they held. And I needed to understand it before it completely destroyed my peace of mind. Jessica's words echoed in my mind for days. I needed to understand what was really going on, but I didn't know where to start. The answer, it turned out, arrived in my mailbox, innocently tucked between a credit card offer and a local grocery flyer. It was a bank statement addressed to my father, Richard. Normally, I would have just placed it on the hall table with the rest of his mail, but the envelope was from a bank I didn't recognize, one I knew my parents didn't usually deal with. A knot of suspicion tightened in my stomach. I hesitated for only a moment before tearing it open. My hands trembled as I unfolded the statement. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a statement for a high-interest savings account, opened just 4 months ago, 2 months after they moved in with me. The current balance was just over $25,000. I stared at the number, my mind racing. Where did they get that kind of money? They had told me they were practically destitute, that their savings were wiped out. I scanned the transaction history. There were 2 large deposits. The first, for $20,000, was made 4 months ago. The second, for $5,000, was deposited just last month. Then I saw the withdrawals. Or rather, the lack of them. There were no withdrawals for bills, for groceries, for anything that would suggest they were using this money to get back on their feet. It was just sitting there, accumulating interest, while I was footing the bill for their entire existence. Then I saw something else that made my heart pound in my chest. There was a recurring monthly transfer of $1,500 into the account. I traced the source of the transfer. It was coming from a pension fund I had never heard my father mention. He had always claimed his only pension was a small one that barely covered his health insurance. This was something else entirely. Something he had hidden from me. The pieces started to click into place, forming a picture of breathtaking deception. The story of their financial ruin was a lie. The bad investments were a lie. They weren't broke, they were hoarding money. They were living in my house for free, allowing me to shoulder all the financial burdens, all while they had a secret nest egg and a hidden income stream. The freeloader comment replayed in my head, but now it sounded different. It wasn't just a cruel insult, it was a deflection, a preemptive strike to make me feel guilty and keep me from questioning their situation. They had painted me as ungrateful to mask their own parasitic behavior. They weren't just taking advantage of my kindness, they had orchestrated a long-term plan to exploit it. I felt a surge of ice-cold fury, a clarity so sharp it hurt. The hurt and confusion I had been feeling for months evaporated, replaced by a steely resolve. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated, deliberate betrayal by the two people in the world I should have been able to trust the most. They hadn't just moved into my house, they had executed an invasion, and I had willingly opened the door for them. The game was over. I now had the proof I needed, and I was going to use it to reclaim my home and my life. Armed with the damning bank statement, I knew I couldn't just have another shouting match in the kitchen. This required a strategy. The first person I called was Jessica. I explained what I had found, my voice low and steady, all the previous emotion burned away by my cold anger. "Oh, Noia. That's monstrous," she said, her voice full of shock. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to evict them," I said, the words tasting strange but firm on my tongue. "Legally, you have to give them notice," Jessica, ever the practical one, advised. "Even though they're family and don't have a lease, they've established residency. You need to give them a formal, written notice. 30 days is standard. It protects you." Her advice solidified my plan. This wasn't going to be a messy, emotional confrontation. It was going to be a clean, legal, and undeniable severing of ties. That evening, I went to a local office supply store and bought a pack of formal eviction notice forms. Filling it out felt surreal. In the blank space for tenant's name, I wrote Richard and Linda. Under reason for eviction, I simply put termination of at-will tenancy. The next day, I waited until I knew they were both in the living room, watching their afternoon television shows. I walked in and switched off the TV. They both looked up at me, startled and annoyed. "What's the big idea?" my father started. I didn't say a word. I placed 2 copies of the eviction notice on the coffee table in front of them. My mother picked one up, her brow furrowed in confusion. I watched as her eyes scanned the formal, unforgiving text. The color drained from her face. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's a 30-day notice to vacate the premises," I said, my voice as calm and emotionless as I could make it. "You have until the end of next month to find alternative living arrangements." My father snatched the paper from her hand. His face turned a blotchy red as he read it. He leaped to his feet, the paper crumpled in his fist. "You're kicking us out? You're kicking out your own parents?" "Yes," I said. "After everything we've done for you? After we've helped you so much with Ben," my mother cried, tears starting to well in her eyes. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment they would try to play the victim. I pulled the photocopied bank statement from my pocket and placed it on the coffee table next to the eviction notices. "You can stop the act," I said, my voice like ice. "Both of you." My father stared at the bank statement, his face a mask of horror. My mother looked from the paper to him and back again, her manufactured tears drying up instantly. The silence in the room was absolute. They had been caught. "Where did you get this?" and my father finally choked out. "It came in the mail," I said simply. "Tell me, how does one struggle to make ends meet with a secret $25,000 savings account and a hidden pension you're funneling into it every month?" A pension that you're collecting while living here for free, eating my food, and calling me a freeloader. They had nothing to say. Their web of lies had been completely unraveled. There were no excuses, no justifications they could possibly offer. They just stared at the proof of their deception, their faces a mixture of shame and fury at being exposed. You have 30 days, I repeated, turning to walk away. I suggest you start using that nest egg to find a place to live. The freeloading is over. The 30 days that followed were the longest and most uncomfortable of my life. My parents treated me with a mixture of wounded silence and outright hostility. They made no effort to pack. They seemed to be operating under the delusion that I would eventually break, that my guilt would override my anger and I would rescind the eviction. They had miscalculated badly. My resolve was iron. On the final day, I came home from work to find them still there, their bags unpacked, watching TV as if it were just another day. My father stood up as I walked in, his arms crossed over his chest. "So, that's it then," he challenged. "You're really going to throw your own family out on the street?" "I gave you 30 days' notice and a wake-up call, Dad," I said, remaining by the door. "What you did with that time was up to you. The street was never the only option, and you know it." My mother started to cry, but this time, the tears were real, tears of desperation and self-pity. "We have nowhere to go, Noya. Your aunt won't take us back. We can't afford a place of our own." "You can't afford it, or you don't want to spend your own money?" I countered, my voice sharp. "You have over $25,000 in savings. That's more than enough for a security deposit and several months' rent on a decent apartment. You have a monthly pension. You are not destitute. You are liars." The truth of the word hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. "We were saving that money for our old age," my father yelled. "For emergencies. It's not for rent. Living in my house was your emergency plan," I shot back. "And my finding out about your lies is your emergency. So, start spending. Your 30 days are up. I want you gone. Tonight." A nasty, bitter argument ensued. They threw every accusation they could think of at me. I was selfish, ungrateful, a terrible daughter. I had forgotten everything they had ever done for me. They tried to guilt me, to shame me, to manipulate me one last time. But it was like water off a duck's back. I had seen behind the curtain. Their words had no more power over me. Finally, defeated, they began to pack their things, slamming drawers and cupboards. The process was filled with muttered curses and resentful glares. It took them 2 hours. As my father carried the last suitcase out the door, he stopped and turned to me, his eyes filled with a cold hatred I had never seen before. "You'll regret this," he spat. "One day, you'll be old and alone, and you'll need help. And you'll remember this day." "No, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'll remember the day my parents called me and my son freeloaders while living in my house. I'll remember the lies and the manipulation. This is just the consequence." He had no reply to that. He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. My mother followed, not even giving me a parting glance. I stood in the silence of my hallway, the slam of the door still echoing in my ears. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound, aching sadness for the family I thought I had, and a quiet, steely relief that the ordeal was finally over. In the weeks that followed my parents' departure, the house felt both incredibly empty and wonderfully full. It was empty of the tension, the passive aggression, and the constant feeling of being watched and judged. But it was full of peace. Ben and I fell back into our old, easy rhythm. We had dance parties in the kitchen while making dinner. We built Lego castles in the living room without me worrying about my father complaining about the mess. The silence was a balm to my frayed nerves. I changed the locks on the doors the day after they left. It felt symbolic, a final, physical act of reclaiming my space. Jessica came over with a bottle of wine and we toasted to my newfound freedom. "How are you, really?" she asked, her eyes full of concern. "I'm sad," I admitted. "I'm mourning the parents I thought I had. But I'm also relieved. I feel like I can breathe in my own home again." I got a call from my Aunt Carol about a week later. She had heard their version of the story, of course, a tale of a cold, heartless daughter who threw her ailing parents out for no reason. "I just want to hear your side, Noya," she said. So I told her. I told her everything, from the freeloader comment to the secret bank account. When I was done, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I see," she said finally, her voice heavy. "I'm so sorry, dear. They can be very convincing." She told me they had rented a small apartment in a senior living community about an hour away. They were using their savings, just as I had told them to. I haven't spoken to my parents since that night. They haven't reached out, and neither have I. The wound is too deep, the betrayal too profound. I don't know if our relationship will ever be repaired, or if I even want it to be. What I do know is that I made the right decision, for me and for my son. My home is my sanctuary again. It's a place of love, respect, and security. I learned a hard lesson about family, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to close the door. Not to be cruel, but to protect the peace you've worked so hard to build. And as I tuck Ben into bed at night, in our quiet, happy house, I know I would do it all over again.